Welcome back to another episode of Meredyth with a Y. I am your host, Meredyth Willits, and today I have the amazing N.L. Holmes. She is a prolific historical fiction author whose background is as layered as an ancient society she brings to life. She spent 2 decades in a convent before turning into an archaeologist, before turning and reinventing herself again into a historical fiction author, of which she has penned 15 novels across 3 series, and I cannot wait to talk to her, so stay with us. Hello, everyone. This is Meredyth with a Y, and I am your host, Meredyth Willits. Today, we are going to go deep, changing lives, and I am giving you the keys to the castle. Good morning to me. Good evening to you in France. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I so appreciate you.
Well, I look forward to talking with you.
This is so exciting. And, they sent me your bio and it was like author, blah, all I hear is blah, 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 author, convent, 20 years, leaves the convent. And I'm like, oh, sign me up. I need to speak with this woman. So I'm so excited to have you here today because your story is so incredibly fascinating. How do you spend 20 years in a convent? What was the turning point that said, this is no longer for me? Or is that what you said?
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I said. I had, over the years, I had sort of my views about religious life had evolved, and this was not very long after Vatican II. So people were changing a lot of things and having to decide what was kept and what was changed. And I found myself in the recent election for prioress, who was the head of the superior of the convent. I found that I was probably going to be elected prioress at some point soon.
Oh, wow.
And so I had to think really hard then about to what extent do I believe in the life as we're living it, because it wouldn't be up to me to take us in a different direction or make changes like that. So I realized that if anyone was out of step, it was me and not the life. So I made an application to leave, and it took months. First, they told me to wait 9 months and sort of sit on it,
Cooling off period.
Yeah, exactly. See if you change your mind, and I did not. So at that point, then we postulated Rome and waited for an answer. So it was all done legally,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was out, starting over at 40,
Yeah.
like a teenager.
What called you to the convent in the beginning?
Well, this was in the 60s, and people were all young people of my age were all sort of looking for something big, something meaningful to give our lives to.
Yeah.
I had friends who went off to ashrams and things like that. And being Catholic, this was an obvious choice. It was the most radical sort of thing you could do, and I was all for radical things. So the life of prayer and sacrifice, and it was a cloistered order, the Discalced Carmelites.
Does that mean like quiet, like you don't speak, or that
That
means
you
you don't
don't
go?
speak except what's strictly necessary. And also, it means you don't see people on the outside. So
Wow.
if we visited with our families or people in the parlor, there was a screen between us and them. And when we had Mass in the chapel, visitors on the other side literally saw us through a screen. So it was sort of deliberate visual separation to dramatize the reality of our choice there.
That gives me like almost like a claustrophobic, like I can't get there type of feeling. Like I just want to get there because I'm not allowed to get there, maybe like to touch
Yeah.
someone or like speak. Because there are a lot of spiritual practices of like not speaking, of like, I don't know if the word's alienating, but separating yourself from others, even if it's just for a short period of time. So for 20 years, you didn't speak unless necessary?
Yeah, we had a daily or more or less daily period of recreation where we sat around and, talked or played ping pong or, something like that. Someone would read us articles from the newspaper. But other than that, you generally worked alone, or if you had to work with someone else, then, you tried to do it silently where possible. And
Yeah.
so, really, the only in-depth conversation you would ever have would be with your superior, which was a little sticky if you and your superior didn't get along well, but that was part of the prize.
Did you feel like that helped you in your spiritual practice in any way, or did it feel clunky or like I'm doing things because I'm supposed to be doing them?
No, it was very congenial to me, who am a sort of solitary person. And I must say that, if nothing else, and there were other things too, ended up helping me strangely as an author. I mean, which is writing is a very solitary endeavor.
Yeah.
And you can belong to a writers group and all, and that's very helpful. But ultimately, you have to sit down in the chair and write by yourself. So I guess that was a good preparation.
And you had the building of 20 years of language and words and ideas and not expressing them, probably just ready to come out. But that wasn't the first thing you do when you left the convent. You decided to go to school and become an archaeologist, clearly the next step in one's life after being a nun is
Well, it was clearly the next step in mine because
right.
as a child, I had wanted to be an archaeologist. So I had started in at the University of Texas and then dropped out after a year and a half. That was part of this sort of 60s, spiritual confusion and where do I belong in the world and all of this. So it was actually not so crazy to step right back into the school role and finish up my degree and then go on for a PhD.
When you were in the convent, were you like dreaming of archaeology? Did you have access to books about the world around you and what was going on to keep you kind of present and then, in that timeline's reality, or were you that separate from the real world as well?
No, no, and yes. We were genuinely cut off, and you might see an old newspaper lying on the floor to sop up water or something, but we didn't stay abreast of fashion or anything of that sort. Just sort of generally world events because we wanted to pray for those.
Hmm.
And no, I bought into that. I wasn't dreaming wistfully of what I'd left behind or what I might be doing or people I had known or whatever. So it was a very effective cutting off. I mean, it works if you give yourself to it honestly.
Yeah.
So
What
when
does
I
it
came,
works mean? What does that mean? It works. It works for you personally to like is being called to the convent, is that a personal calling in the sense of I want to give myself to this, or is it like the Peace Corps where you want to give back to to society? Is it an individualized?
well, both I'd say. I mean, it's something that has to be very personal because you will give as much of yourself as you let yourself. So you have to buy into it completely,
Yeah.
or it doesn't cut where it's supposed to cut, if I may put it that way. On the other hand, it's presumably for the sake of the world, and thanksgiving to God certainly, but in order to call down His blessings on your community.
Hmm.
So it's you're supported by the community. They're an order that they do small tasks and sell handicrafts and things like this, but by and large, it's the charity of the community that supports you, and so you take on particular requests for prayer, and you pray constantly. 7 times a day, there's communal prayer,
Wow.
and chanting and things like this. So it's both individual and communal. And this particular order is probably more individual than many. For example, it's more silent, it's more individual. Uh, it's in the individual nun and her prayer rather than great choral presentations like, say, the Benedictines or something. Here, I live 20 minutes from a Benedictine, a male Benedictine community here in France,
Mm-hmm.
whose mission is to preserve Gregorian chant. And so they have the most beautiful liturgies, and people come from miles around to hear these incredibly gorgeous, austere, immemorial style liturgies. But ours wasn't that, on the outward scale. I would say it was a pretty modest, smaller community for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it was all about our prayer and contemplation of the solitude and silence that one uh, counts on to be effective with
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. How much of life would you say you lived before you went into the convent? Like, did you feel like you did enough? Were you like, okay, I did all this and now I'm going in? Did your parents panic?
Yeah, they
Siblings?
did. um, yeah, I think so. I think I knew what I was doing. I
Hmm.
was 21 when I entered,
Okay.
and so I'd been to college. I was engaged to somebody, so
Wow.
I'd had a range of experience.
Yeah.
Um, they used to accept people right out of high school, and I don't believe they do anymore. At least this community doesn't, for that reason, so that you're making a free choice and not just sort of sliding in for lack of something better.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, was that in France that you were in the convent, or was that in
No,
the
no, it
States?
was in my hometown in Texas.
Oh, wow, in Texas. Ha-
Imagine.
I know. And like when you're looking back at all, first of all, did you meet any popes? I need to know that.
Yes, yes. I saw John Paul II twice.
Wow. And how was that?
It was a great experience. We actually went to San Antonio for his visit and stayed there with our sisters in San Antonio. And we were out on the street, with our bare faces hanging out, and saw him and received his blessing. So it was, and with millions of people,
Yeah.
this was a real experience of the church in a different way, not just sort of in a spiritual level, but physical and visible. It was very moving, very very strong.
And when you started to kind of, is it the word doubt, or is it question, or like what does that feel like as you start to kind of wiggle towards that 20-year mark, and when did that start?
Well, I would say that started. I don't know. It's hard to say. The fact is that I sort of had doubts almost from the moment I got in.
Get out.
But this is not uncommon apparently, and they kept saying, "Oh no, no, everybody does. You have a vocation. Just hang in there." And there was an awful lot of conscience ripping going on, and I finally sort of, let's say, suffered a the nervous breakdown. Let's call it that, a
Really?
kind of crisis, an emotional crisis, uh, because I just wasn't sure I was being honest with myself, and everybody kept reassuring me and all of this. So, but they fortunately let me see a priest who was a psychologist, and so this ended well. In fact, it ended so well that I think this is the best thing that can happen to somebody. Frankly, psychoanalysis is very very useful to finding yourself and the truth about yourself, and which can be terrible and painful and all the rest. But you come out on the other side so much stronger
Mm.
that and in my case, so much better able to see clearly,
Yeah.
to make a judgment, that it was only under those conditions that I could ever have left, made that choice freely and not just in a sort of terrified panic of some sort. So, you know, as clouds usually do, this one had a silver lining, and it worked well for me.
When you entered back into secular society, was there anything that you were like, "Holy crap," like the internet or,
Oh
like
yeah, computers and credit cards were much more common than they had been. I had run an antique store before I entered, and so that was, I had some knowledge of credit cards, but they were huge when I got out, and of course the computer was starting and word processing and all of this, which was a completely new skill I had to learn in order to go to school. It was
yeah.
that was other than that, you'd be surprised how little things changed. Basically, it's the styles are different, the cars look a little different, but other than that, I can't say there were any culture shocks.
Did you feel like internally, not just like, okay, I don't think that this is for me anymore as far as being in the convent. Did you feel like the Catholic Church as a whole was going in a different direction than you internally felt like this is kind of no longer in alignment with my spiritual north, if you will?
Yeah. Well, that's a decision that I at least was slow to make, because that would be like saying I'm right and 40 gazillion people throughout history are wrong. But in a post Vatican church, you do have to question things. What has changed that maybe shouldn't, and what should change and hasn't. And I don't. Perhaps that's just a case of style rather
Hmm.
than profound changes. I do wish the church would see its way to be a little more socially liberal, and we've had popes who were, and some are not. So, um, on the other hand, I think there have been changes made in the liturgy that are aesthetically off-putting, for me at least, that could be nudged back. But things don't happen quickly, and this was only 50 years ago. So, I'm willing to let the tide swirl around a little and the mud settle.
Can I ask
But
you kind of like a interest? I mean, I'm interested in it. How do you see the Native Americans that were found in Canada underneath the nunneries and convents,
oh,
that were taken? Like, what is your view on that? How did that? When did you find out about that? What does it feel like knowing that? And is it in alignment with maybe some of the stuff you did see as far as Catholic views on Native Americans or other communities?
yeah. Well, it's only rather recently that I've learned about some of these things, frankly, and it's lamentable. I mean, there are no words to describe the sheer horror and inappropriateness. I mean, just uh, to look to the church for salvation and then have them turn this on you. What can I say?
Yeah.
But that's nothing new. The church may be divinely founded, but it's an organization of human beings, and we're capable of the worst, the very worst, as well as the best. So
Yeah.
um, it's
Do you think
just
that's one of the problems though with churches
yeah,
is this crazy kind of false belief that someone, because they're ordained or has a calling or wants to serve, that they're at a different phase of holiness than the rest of us, and then that kind of skews and perverts everything. Like, I had a recent kind of I did ayahuasca, and what I was shown was you're just as evil as you are good, and in every second of every moment you get to choose. Like, you get to
exactly.
choose.
It is always a matter of your choice. No one is forced to do evil. No one is. I mean, nobody's so innocent that they can only think of something good to do. There's always a choice. And I think that probably the kind of insulation or elevation of church people sometimes makes them, as you say, think their decisions are always good. That they're somehow, because they're speaking for the Holy Spirit, under certain very narrow conditions, that everything they think and do is a
Anointed.
reflection of the divine, and
Yeah.
it's not, folks. you know,
Yeah.
priests and popes and nuns and everybody else can sin and can sin horribly, and so I think humility is probably the cure for all of this, but it's not easy to come by.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it was freeing and it made me stop. I don't even know how to describe recognizing your own evil. It's almost a freedom
Mm-hmm.
towards goodness.
Oh yes, oh totally,
I
and
don't know.
this is on a secular level. This is what the psychotherapy does. You have to confront yourself, the evil as well as the good, and so I mean I lump that in with spiritual experiences of various kinds too, and I mean it can be terribly, terribly painful and daunting.
Yeah.
You just think,
You don't want to be bad.
yeah, I mean, how can I live with this creature,
Yeah.
And how dragged down by all of these sort of forces that are in me, how can I ever make a good choice?
Yeah.
And yet we go on and we do, we will to do it, and so we can. I
But I
think
think
it's I think it's all
shame is the biggest destroyer, I believe, of relationships and of
yeah,
humanity. Shame will have you cover stuff up. Shame will have you pretend. Shame will have you lie, gaslight people around you. Like the whole shame to me is the end all be all of destroyer because it makes everything fake and false and no one
yeah,
owns up to their own stuff to themselves or other people. Makes you lie. It's really destructive. And and I think that if the church um were to stop with the insanity, in my opinion, of like priests are celibate and you call them father and nuns, all of this, it's like you're pretending or you're trying to be something that you could never be because you're meant to be human. You're
yeah,
meant to be a human on this earth. You're meant to have certain human qualities and then you still have them, and
yeah.
then by way of shame for having them and being what God meant you to be on this planet, it starts to skew everything. And then you have shame and then it gets perverted. And then, we have this huge problem of the church and molestation cases and
Yeah.
all of that. And it's all born from this fake belief that you are more than other humans somehow.
Well, originally priests did marry,
Oh,
and
really?
yes, for the first 1,000 years of the church, and in the Greek Orthodox Church, which I've attended frequently since I'm married to a Greek. They still ordain married men. Once he's a priest, he cannot marry, but you know,
Mm-hmm.
so the seminarians all run out and get married before they're ordained. But I truthfully think that's a much more grounded approach to priesthood, and there may still be monks, for example, choose freely not to marry because they live in community.
Yeah.
But for parish priests, I cannot think of a good reason why not. And if nothing else convinces people, let the horrible spectacle of all of these child molestation
Yeah.
cases, uh,
Yeah.
because that's going to attract a certain kind of person. I mean,
Yeah.
also perfectly normal people, but those with a kind of kink like that, or I don't know, seems to me that there's a very simple solution to kind of weed them out.
Were you privy to that when you were in the convent, or is that something they
Not
keep
at
from you?
all, not at
Yeah.
all. And I found out later that at least one priest who had been a chaplain in our community was part of that, and it
Oh,
didn't
wow.
surprise me at all. He was the only sort of unspiritual chaplain that we had in all those 20 years. So
You could
probably
just feel
didn't have a real vacation.
you could just feel it off
Yeah,
the
yeah.
yeah, there's something weird about that person. So after you left, I'm fascinated, by the way. I could talk about this for like 2
I
months.
see you are.
I'm sorry. I'm fascinated. Yeah. So after you left the convent, you went to got a doctorate in classical and Near Eastern studies from Bryn Mawr. and then you excavated sites across Greece and Israel.
Mm.
What was that like, going to Israel and like in Greece and diving into the very sites that you've been learning about or being kind of a part of for decades?
Well, it was wonderful. It was truly fascinating, and I have to say that excavation is wonderful on many levels. It's it was part of what attracted me to archaeology as opposed to say history or ancient languages was the physicality of it, the
Hmm.
fact that you're actually out there in the dirt, you know, coming to grips with material culture in a very material way, and I think that gives you a well, it attracts a different kind of personality. Archaeologists are very different personalities than just historians. So,
In what way?
well, I don't know. They're kind of the cowboy of the ancient studies people, you know, and I'm not the only one who says this. It just attracts a certain kind of person. Scholarship tends to be very, you know, solitary, and by necessity. I mean, you're in a library a lot or in the classroom, but here you're living in a community out in the middle of nowhere, often under very primitive conditions, and you're working with these colleagues who come from all over the world often, and it's you really form very strong relationships with people and
Mm,
very lasting friendships, and you see a side of them that you wouldn't normally see, you know. Um, and it was just you're coming to grips with the country, the wherever you are, in a
hmm.
different way too. You're literally in their dirt, you know.
Yeah.
You're living in their towns. You're working side by side with people from the village there, and it's just it seems very real, and it seemed to me always to bring you close to the past in a way that was almost, I don't know how to say this without sounding weird, but almost supernatural. I mean, it's
Yeah.
you hold a broken pot in your hand and know that somebody 2,500 or 3,000 years ago held that in their hand, and they formed that out of clay, the same clay you're standing on, and
Yeah.
it's just
Surreal.
it's a very real kind of connection with the also because you're living in a primitive kind of conditions often, it brings you closer to their daily life in a way that sitting in your air conditioned office doesn't. So I just found it absolutely wonderful part of my academic career, and even though it ended with our when our son was born, it was, you know, it was something I wouldn't have overlooked or given up for anything really.
What was your motive of being an archaeologist outside of like, I like this stuff? Like, did
Well,
you have like, I really want to touch this. I want to go to Israel to find that. Were there questions you wanted answered?
not particularly. No, you know, if you direct a dig, you have to have a question you're setting out to answer.
Okay.
For example, when we were working in Israel, I worked with a team from Duke, and they were setting out to examine the lifestyle of this town, Sepphoris. It's a town in Galilee, very near Nazareth, and they wanted to see if the Jewish population of this town lived the same way as the Gentiles, or if they were maintaining, you know, a kind of some aspects of their Jewish religious life there that was identifiable on the ground.
Hmm.
And it was a kind of a yes and no answer. I mean, we did find evidence of kosher butchering, and we found evidence of mikvot, those ritual bathtubs and stuff. So it looked like even though they were surrounded by Greek-speaking Gentiles, that they maintained some of their identity. So that was a really interesting, you know, project, very specified. But I actually went on this dig as an artist, so rather than as
Oh,
an excavator. So I was there just to learn what things were like, kind of without prior questions, just to see, and I saw everything that came out of the ground because I was drawing it all. And
Wow.
so that was a kind of a cool position to be in.
Did that take you into more of a spiritual energy than from maybe the legalism, if you will, of Catholicism to more of like when I went to India and my guide there, I was like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to an ashram. He's like, you're absolutely not going to an ashram. We're going to be with the people. And I was like, good idea. And so like that's very much more spiritual, being around the people, walking through the streets, like doing the things versus sitting in an ashram with a bunch of people doing yoga or whatever. Did it feel tactile, kind of with the people, spiritually connected in a different way than the convent? And how'd that feel?
In a different way, yes. I don't know that it was more or less.
Mhm.
There are many vocations and many paths to God. So I won't say it was better or worse, but it was certainly more tactile. And being an artist from childhood up, I am a pretty sensory person. I see things, I smell things, I hear things. I pay attention to my environment, and that was kind of a no-no in the convent. You were supposed to shut all that sensory
Hmm.
information out as much as possible, and I don't think I ever really succeeded in doing that. But
Why would you want to shut that off
well, to listen to God, rather than
inside?
the neighbors yelling at each other or the dog barking or something. And as I say, this is not like all of Catholic doctrine says
Yeah.
this. There are various paths, but that was the Carmelite path. So for me, it was a wonderful banquet of beauty, frankly. And since beauty comes from God, well, that was spiritual in its way too. Even though I was sort of had gone pretty secular at this point. It was a particular being in Israel, I guess, and walking the paths where the Gospels were lived. We were, as I say, we were like a mile from Nazareth, and that's where you went shopping if you wanted to go shopping. So to see the Lake Galilee and the beautiful hills, and it was perhaps the what shall I say, the gospel component that had been missing to me in a way in the convent. Um, we supposedly were living the gospel life, living the life of the early church in this small community, but I often felt that it was, the true spirit of sort of simple charity was missing, and maybe that's a judgment on my part. I don't know that other people perceived it that way at all. But it seemed very hierarchical to me, very more Roman Empire than than first century Galilee. Let's put it that way. So
Yeah.
um, it's just being in the atmosphere there of Galilee was, I think, a revelation of the sorts.
Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of, balance things out a little for me.
And how long did you spend doing archaeology, and when did the calling turn from artist archaeologist to now I'm going to author books? Like how
Well, that was
word
a
chapter.
yeah,
Word
that was when
chapter.
I retired. I had been teaching history and humanities and ancient world, obviously, and archaeology too. So I'd been teaching at first Stockton College in New Jersey, and then when my husband moved down to Florida, and I moved with him, obviously. He got a job at the University of South Florida in Tampa,
Okay.
so I got a job there too, and I taught there for 25 years, I guess. And so
Wow.
when I retired, I had amassed a lot of knowledge of the different classes that I had taught, and also had come across a lot of really interesting events in the past, things that we have just a little snippet of documentary evidence about. And in fact, I guess my first book had its genesis in a class that I taught on ancient Near Eastern empires. there was one little episode that was a divorce in the city state of Ugarit, which is in Syria. It's a coastal city of Syria, and it was a small country but very powerful because it had a huge navy, and it went back and forth as a vassal of first the Hittites and then the Egyptians and then the Assyrians, and at one point there was a royal divorce, and we just have the merest little snippets of information about it that happen to be preserved on a couple of cuneiform texts. And so I gave all these 4 or 5 texts to my students and said, "Here's what we know. These are the points of fact. So interpret this. Tell me what happened." And of course, you can hardly say anything. You almost have to slide into speculation. And so I
Yeah.
thought to myself, in looking at their papers, this really needs to be turned into a novel. And it was like, ka-ching, when I retire, maybe that's what I'll do. So that's what I did.
And now, like, you've 15 novels. How do you, do you take just like the seed of reality and build on it from, again, like you said, speculation? How much is reality? How much is speculation, would you say, in your books? And how does that work?
Well, it depends. Certainly they all have a kernel of historical reality. Less so in the cozy mysteries that I'm writing right now. They're more just fictional events. But the other books all have a heavy grounding in political events that were really taking place, and most of the characters are real people about whom we know practically nothing except their name and maybe a
Wow.
thing or two they did. So, in essence, they're fictional because I had to fatten them up and put meat on their bones.
Yeah.
But the amount that is historical varies from book to book. The Hittite series, one of them is about a king, a real king, and it takes a real event in his life and figures out how this might have come about. So fictionalizes between the dots, so to speak. So
Hmm.
that's heavily fiction, heavily historical. Another book just takes the name of his charioteer and spins a story about him. How did he come to be the king's charioteer? And I bring in other characters. A man who was an ambassador, I make that his grandfather, and it just tie them together, who may not have been related at all, but taking these sort of firm points of historicity and creating a fictional account around them. So that's pretty much the way most of the books happened.
Hmm.
The Lord Hani mysteries, the ones set in Egypt, each has a historical basis. So the 6 books of that series covers the rise to power of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh, and traces across the years of his reign, and then stops when his son Tutankhamun comes to the throne. So there's that
Yeah.
historical arc. Um, but then there's also a murder mystery that takes place in each book, and then a family drama of Hani. Hani is a real historical person who occurs frequently, but just the mention of his name, he does this, he carries this message, he accomplishes this task. So
Hmm.
I've taken those tasks of Hani and created a series out of them by embroidering them lavishly, I have to admit. So that series too was pretty historical, and then this third series is a spin-off from the Hani mysteries about his daughter, whom we meet as a 7-year-old in the first of those books, and she grows up in the course of his story, and she's 24. Then begins her own series of mysteries, but she's not a diplomat like Hani, so there isn't that much, real historical or political happening going on in her life. So Hani brings a little of that in from time to time, but mostly it's just she's a physician, actually, a sunnet, which they actually had women physicians, but it was unusual. So she encounters people are brought to her injured or dying, and thereby hangs a mystery. So uh, it's mostly fictional. Her
That
stories.
one's the last, what would that be? The last three novels then?
Yeah, I guess there's 4 out now, and
Or
one that I just ready to turn back to the editor. So
so the most recent release is Melody of Evil.
right, yeah.
Um, so when you explore these things like loyalty and personal identity, oppressive regimes, are you thinking about what's going on politically today? And or when you are thinking about what's going on politically today, do you think about the past?
Well, I would say I think about the past when I see what's happening today, and in terms of what the conscience issues and things that I've brought up in my books, I guess they were sort of subconsciously sparked by what was happening. For example, one of the books is about Syrian refugees, and this was written at a moment when this was on every newspaper. It
Yeah.
was, they were just, of course, they still are pouring out of Syria, out of war-torn Syria, and that made me start thinking about refugees, the horrors that they have to face, and how traumatized they must come out of that experience,
Yeah.
and then they try to remake their life somewhere else. And gee, the same thing was happening in 1300 BC in Syria too. So I guess I consciously took a parallel situation there and developed it. Um, and also, you can say things about the past that you maybe would think twice about judging a current event, or at least I would. I'm not a political scientist. What do I know? So I have an opinion certainly, and I can see what I see, but it's easier for me to lay it out in another time in another place.
Yeah.
Anybody who wants to read into that a parallel with the present's free to do that.
Do you look at stuff today and go, "We've done this before. How are you guys not clocking though we've done this before many, many times?"
I'm sorry to say I say that to myself every day. It's history may not be a complete circle that repeats itself literally, but it certainly comes close to it.
Yeah.
It's a spiral. Let's say you hope that we're spiraling a little slowly, a little higher every time, but
Yeah.
we really come around to the same point all
Well,
too
I
frequently.
remember, learning I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I remember judging the heck out of, you know, um, the Holocaust and how could you let this happen? I remember having so much judgment clearly and obviously. And now I feel like we're kind of having the same kind of walk through
Yep.
taking a group of people and deciding what to do with them, taking a group of people and deciding, like, however you want to comb through the reasons of why. Um, it still kind of is the same basic action of the alligator Alcatraz and
Yeah, great
um,
song.
all of this crazy, getting rid of due process to move people regardless of who, what, where, when, and why. Or I don't even care what your politics are. Taking a group of people from the United States and moving them to a different location without due process, to me, screams problematic.
And
And I
deportation was a huge thing in antiquity. It was whole populations were picked up and moved somewhere else to get, so they wouldn't be troublemakers.
Yeah,
This is something that comes up again and again in my books because it came up in reality. You're just postponing the explosion. That's what brought down the Bronze Age. These people, refugees fleeing unlivable situations, compounded by natural disasters and crop failures, and I mean, it's just like,
we've done this
hello,
before.
everyone.
Yeah.
This happened before, and we better stop doing the same thing they did, which made it worse. But you know, we don't. As you and I both know, people have the capacity to do terrible things as well as good ones.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels surreal to live through this. It
Hmm.
feels surreal to be watching this and for people to be co-signing this in this day and age. I think it has to do probably with education
I agree.
or, my
Education.
dad and I always talk about, he's like, when these folks go up to heaven, and everyone has their different reality of what heaven looks like. My dad's like, is God going to ask, now, can you show me the line on the map that I drew that said that these people were immigrants or illegal
Right.
aliens? Like I need you to show me on the map where I drew that, because it's so easy, and I think back to goofy things like the Tower of Babylon, those types of stories, and it's just like, you know I look at the universe and God and just the plan of the world. It's like, okay, we're going to make these people have brown skin, so it's going to be super easy for you to dislike them, and let's see what you're going to do with that.
Yes.
And we're going to make this
Now this
person.
is worse than some other color skin.
Yeah,
Well,
right, right.
the irony is that as an archaeologist, I mean, I'm not a prehistorian, but I know enough about the development of the human race to know that we were all black to start with.
Mhm.
I mean, until very recently, more and more they're finding out that the Europeans, the white people, were dark until 10,000 years ago. That's nothing. That's
Yeah,
nothing. It's so the whole idea of race or whatever is just so ridiculous, and it's such a false concept. Even as a concept, it's just we're just on a spectrum that goes from light to dark depending on where in the planet we live.
yeah.
It's
It was one of my favorite classes was actually archaeology in college. And I had this brilliant teacher and professor, and she was like, okay, we're going to go through the races. And so, wide noses. What race does wide noses belong to? And, she showed that, okay, curly hair. And it's funny, me sitting here with a wide nose and curly
and
hair,
curly hair.
PS. And I always have Black women, especially on social media, they're like, girl, I don't think you know your heritage, as they see my features a lot of times. And I'm like, I'll take it.
Yeah, don't
Um,
take
but it
anything.
was so interesting to learn at that very young age. I think I was about 19. That it is absurd and there is no such thing as a race because
Yeah,
it has to be quantified. And because it cannot be quantified, then it does not exist. It's just
yeah,
a social experiment of craziness, to be honest.
exactly.
That takes education, like and when
It
you
does.
the average, I think I read the average education in America is about seventh grade.
Wow.
And I know, right? And when I read that, I went, "Oh, well, that makes sense because I didn't learn this good stuff until I was in college." And
Yeah,
so, um, these concepts prey on uneducated people
it's
who
ignorance. It's
feel,
not malice, I think.
yeah, and it
Well,
feel
yes
better
and
about
no. I mean,
themselves.
yeah. Once you've embedded this idea of, you know, these people are worse than I am, then it's easy to blame them for everything.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not automation that's taking the jobs. It's them. you
right.
know, duh. I just I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough to watch. I can't imagine having your experience of the inner work and then the literal outer work of touching and seeing and experiencing and learning about all of these people and destruction of people and um what we can do to each other, and then to be sitting here living in the most wild of times, watching it in
Right.
in in real time happening,
Well,
and has to
yeah,
be
I think the
frustrating.
fact that we live in this truly wild time is reinforces what I've always felt was my mission as a teacher, and now, frankly, even as an author, and that is to convince people that the people of the past, that foreign country known as the past, are perfectly like us. They're
Yeah,
utterly indistinguishable from us. They may have a different language, they may have a different worldview as a result of their education, but their emotions are exactly like ours. And so we can understand the decisions they make crazy as they may seem to us, because we can only react to things in a couple of ways. We've only got this, certain number of arrows in our quiver, so to speak. I mean, I think the whole them versus us thing, whether that be over there geographically or back there in the past, is just, I mean, it's so limiting. It's so fake and false. And we're just we're the same. We're the same. We do the same things they do.
Yeah, we wake
We
up, we
just
want our
have
kids to
just
be
have different
okay.
technology. Yeah.
Yeah, we want our kids to be okay. We want to be healthy.
Yeah.
We want to be loved. We want to have food in our
To know where we
stomachs. And
fit in the world. It's, yeah.
yep. And then there's all this crazy outside chaos that we kind of almost invite. As I'm
Yeah.
sitting here talking to you, I'm like thinking how interesting a book would be to write about what is currently happening as if it was historical fiction. And at the end of the book, write and welcome to the United States
Yes, yes.
as a present. Like the person going into it believes they're reading historical fiction.
Or science fiction or something. Well,
Yeah, or
that's,
science fiction.
yeah.
And it's not, and it's, I mean, I just sit there and think about like what happened to the orbs that were around New Jersey, and now we have like a 12-mile mothership headed towards Earth. Like what is happening? Like where
Yes.
are Nikki's going to be running back to the convent. Like like I can't anymore.
Too
Your
late.
husband,
Too late.
too late. You have a
Yeah.
husband and a child. Um, well, your books are just unbelievable. You have so much that you allowed yourself to become and to experience and to learn to pour into these 15 books. What is, the end game? Do you retire? Do you have an end game? Do you have a book number in mind, a goal that you've set for yourself? Or is
Well,
it
since
just
I'm officially already retired, I can't retire. So
right?
I just, I'm writing till I don't want to, I guess. I used to paint insanely. I mean, from childhood on, I was never without a sketchbook in my hand. And then 25 years ago or so, I just lost interest. I've done a little since, but it doesn't grip me. And I guess when I come to the point where I feel that about writing, I'll find a new form of self-expression or something, or a better way to get my message across. I don't know. But for the moment, just keep turning them out. I do feel like I perhaps want to get back to some more serious books. I've been writing these cozy mysteries here recently, and I can write them very rapidly because they're formulaic, as cozy mysteries are genre to the end.
Hmm.
But they don't fully satisfy me as a person. They're light, and God knows there's a use for light reading in this
Yeah.
world. I
Yeah.
fully approve of people picking up a light book to read. I do it too. But there are, I guess, some things I want to come to grips with a little more serious, and um, just got to find the right historical episode to hitch on to, I guess.
I think the current one you could probably churn out about 10, 20 books easily about, because
Yeah,
like I said, you have this ability because of what you've done to draw those comparisons and to go deeper instead of it just being about like just the current politic.
yeah,
You're like, no, it's actually there's more to what's happening right now. There's a reason that this is happening. It's 101, destruction 101 of a nation and of a
yeah.
people.
And we're in
And
danger of losing our soul, I'm afraid.
yeah, and you have that view of thousands of years to show people, like this is where this is going to end up. And they're, like they talk about in Gaza, we're in the fifth stage of starvation.
Mm.
And when you enter the fifth stage of starvation, it affects generations. Like
Oh, yeah.
it is now becoming genetic. We are now in a genetic situation here with
Yeah.
starvation. And I feel like we're probably in the third stage of a destruction of the United States.
Yeah.
And so,
It's
like, what
picking
is
up Indeed.
Yeah, like what is that fourth stage? What is that fifth stage? Because you've seen it. You've seen the fourth and fifth stage. You've seen the fallout of that 10,000, 5,000, 3,000 years ago. And it's just called something different. It was just called somebody different.
Yeah, I recommend to everybody to read the history of Rome, because this is very reminiscent of how the Republic turned into an empire, and an empire that fell. So
Yeah.
it's
Well, what do they say? It fell from within. These
yeah,
things fall from within. We're not going to die by nuclear war, that everyone's afraid of, or any of these things, or by China or by Russia. We're going to self-destruct.
yeah, and you could make a case. I mean, so we can end on an optimistic note, that it didn't so much just disappear as changed.
Yeah,
I mean, these barbarians that overran it became Romanized, and they took that culture forward, changed and
change.
diminished into the future, and it became European culture, and they groped their way back to kind of classical level by the Renaissance. So it's a cycle. What can I say?
Yeah, and
A cycle is not
maybe this
perfect.
is the end of something that wasn't working anymore. Maybe this
Yeah,
is the beginning. Not maybe, it is. It's the
for sure.
beginning of something new. We just don't know what it looks like, and sometimes that's scary. But
Yeah,
um I'm so happy that you came on the podcast today. I'm so happy
me
that
too.
you're willing to talk about literally all of the things.
Yeah.
I appreciate you for that. Your books, the most recent again is Melody of Evil, available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and in bookstores. There's 15 of them out there, of which are 3 different series. So
Mm.
look for N.L. Holmes, and then you'll be able to find all of her books. Just brilliant, brilliant writing, brilliant way of taking fact and fiction and of all the good stuff. So check her out. But thank you very much for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
All right, guys, I will see you here next week. If you have anyone out there that wants to listen to the show, please make sure and share it with them, like and subscribe and give stars on all the good things. But I will see you guys here next week. Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening. If you would like to connect on a more personal level, head over to meredythwillits.com or on Instagram at Meredyth with a Y for behind-the-scene footage and outtakes. Please subscribe and come back each week for more Meredyth with a Y. Thanks again for